This announcement that we made is worth much more than just the tariff side of it. The tariffs are obviously a piece of it as we're reacting to the new dynamic that's going to be out there. And it'll offset a good bit of it. So we'll move about 300,000 units of production.
GM's CEO just confessed their most trusted trucks hide engines built to fail. Hundreds of thousands of Silverados, Sierras, and SUVs revealed in one announcement. The recall wasn't damage control. It was the collapse of loyalty tied to America's most iconic pickups. So why did it take years of complaints to get here? How far does the deception stretch? And what happens when lifetime owners turn their backs for good? The day trust died. GM did not just issue a recall, they broke a promise generations of truck buyers lived by. For decades, families across America parked Chevrolet Silverados and GMC Sierras in their driveways with pride. These trucks were more than tools. They were family heirlooms, rolling proof that American engineering meant toughness, dependability, and safety. When a father handed the keys to his son, it was not just a vehicle being passed down. It was an oath that this machine would never let the family down. That bond snapped the moment GM's chief executive officer admitted that nearly 900,000 trucks and sport utility vehicles carried defective engines that could seize without warning. Imagine cruising down the interstate with children in the back seat, the radio playing, when suddenly the engine locks solid. The steering vanishes, 18-wheelers barrel down behind you. That is not an inconvenience. That is terror, manufactured and sold as reliability. Truck buyers did not just lose power on the road, they lost confidence in an entire brand. The day the recall went public was the day GM's carefully built image of trust collapsed in real time. But the announcement was only the beginning of the betrayal. The so-called fix revealed just how little GM thought of the very people who made their empire possible. A cap instead of a fix? Would you trust your family's life to thicker oil and a new cap? That is exactly what GM told us to accept. Instead of replacing flawed crankshafts or redesigning engines that mechanics said were doomed to fail, the company instructed dealers to drain the factory oil and pour in a heavier grade. Alongside this oil swap came a new filler cap and a manual insert. In other words, what should have been a billion-dollar engineering recall was dressed up as a do-it-yourself style oil change. To the average owner, it sounded insulting. Trucks marketed as the most dependable now depended on a sticker and a bottle of 0W40. Worse, thicker oil means reduced efficiency, less fuel economy, and performance that no longer matches the glossy commercials. The very ratings used to sell these vehicles were undercut by the fix itself. And for anyone whose engine already carried microscopic scars, no cap or fluid could undo the damage. It was a band-aid on a bullet wound, meant to stretch engines just far enough to cross the warranty finish line. Drivers felt mocked. Families who spent hard-earned money were told their peace of mind came in the shape of a plastic cap. But when owners began shouting louder, regulators finally took notice, and the story grew darker. If this already feels like the trucks we trusted turned into ticking time bombs, hit like right now. Drop a comment below. Tell us if you'd ever trust a company again after cutting corners this deep, buried in complaints. We were filing reports for years, and they ignored us until Washington stepped in. Drivers across the country logged complaint after complaint with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Stories poured in of trucks stalling on highways, of sudden loss of propulsion, of families stranded on shoulders waiting for help. The agency counted dozens of confirmed failures, more than a dozen crashes, and more than a dozen injuries before the problem could no longer be brushed aside. By January of 2025, regulators had opened a preliminary evaluation. Within months, the probe exploded into an engineering analysis covering nearly 900,000 vehicles. The escalation was rapid because the data was overwhelming. Each new complaint added weight, turning owner frustration into undeniable evidence. It was not GM that admitted defeat. It was Washington that forced their hand. Truck buyers were furious because they saw the pattern. Only after the complaints reached critical mass did executives admit what they already knew from internal reports. We were the watchdogs. We were the early warning system. GM ignored us until federal investigators proved we were right all along. And when investigators dug deeper, they discovered something even more damning. This betrayal was not a one-time event. We've seen this play before. This was not GM's first scandal. And the last time, a jury caught them red-handed. Just a few years earlier, truck owners sued over excessive oil consumption. Engineers had flagged defective piston rings, but management approved a cheaper cleaning process instead of a redesign. The gamble was simple. Push engines past their warranty period, then leave customers with the repair bills. When the case went to trial in October of 2022, internal memos told the truth. Executives knew. They chose to gamble with our money. The jury sided with owners, awarding damages that climbed into the hundreds of millions. That verdict was supposed to be a warning. Yet here we are again, facing seized engines, lawsuits, and the same playbook of denial until exposure. For many families, it feels like generational betrayal. Fathers and sons who once swore by Silverados now feel swindled by corporate accountants. We are not dealing with an accident of engineering. We are dealing with a culture that values quarterly savings over human safety. If the past taught us anything, it is that this cycle repeats until the pressure is unbearable. And now, with regulators circling and lawsuits piling up, the pressure on GM is building faster than ever. The next step in this saga takes us inside the engines themselves. Engines built to fail. The defect was smaller than a hair, but it turned our trucks into ticking time bombs. In modern engines, tolerances are measured in thousandths of an inch. A crankshaft or connecting rod that is even slightly too rough or too wide can spell disaster. That is what happened in GM's V8 engines. Tiny imperfections in the machining left microscopic debris inside the oil system. Once that debris circulated, it scraped away the delicate oil film meant to keep metal parts gliding smoothly. Without that cushion, metal clashed against metal, generating heat, scarring bearings, and leaving behind glittering fragments of destruction. Drivers did not need to wait decades for trouble. Some engines locked up before reaching 30,000 miles. Families who thought they had bought trucks for a lifetime discovered they had bought lottery tickets instead. The cruel irony was that nothing looked wrong from the outside. These engines carried polished covers and gleaming paint, but inside, flaws invisible to the naked eye waited for the right moment to bring everything to a halt. This was not random chance. It was baked into the production process, and once you know GM could have prevented it, the sense of betrayal cuts even deeper. The Corvette proves they could have done better. GM can build V8s that survive the racetrack. So why did they not protect our families? Look at the Chevrolet Corvette. Its LT2 engine shares the same family roots as the truck powertrains, yet it does not seize on highways. Why? Because engineers gave the Corvette everything it needed to thrive under punishment. Forged steel rods, high-grade alloy crankshafts, and a dry sump oil system ensure constant lubrication, even during brutal track conditions. Corvette owners drive at 6,000 revolutions per minute with confidence, while Silverado owners lose engines at 2,000. That contrast makes one truth impossible to ignore. GM knows how to build bulletproof V8s. The same company that engineered indestructible sports car powertrains chose to cut corners when designing family trucks. The decision was not about ability. It was about priorities. Racing customers were given every protection. Working families hauling trailers and carrying kids were handed compromises that saved money on the assembly line. Once you realize that the Corvette proves durability was possible all along, it becomes clear that cost-cutting was not just a business choice. It was a gamble made with our safety. And when a gamble like that is made, the warranty clock suddenly becomes the most important timer of all. The warranty game. They did not fix it. They delayed it just long enough for our warranties to run out. Inside GM's offices, engineers and executives weigh problems like accountants, not like mechanics. A full recall replacing crankshafts and rods would cost billions. A cheaper mitigation, like switching oil grades, costs pennies. If that temporary solution stretches the engine's life by another 10 or 20,000 miles, many trucks will collapse only after the basic warranty has expired. At that point, the bill falls on us, not on the company. This is not a conspiracy theory. Internal documents from earlier oil consumption cases revealed exactly this logic. management openly debated whether to redesign or to manage the failure until after coverage ended. The choice was simple. Let the warranty clock run out and let customers pick up the pieces. That cold arithmetic may satisfy quarterly earnings, but it obliterates long-term loyalty. Families that lose their savings to engine replacements do not forget. The warranty game explains why GM acted slowly, issued vague fixes, and never offered full transparency. They were not protecting us. They were protecting balance sheets. But balance sheets cannot tow stranded trailers off highways. And that brings us to the glossy trophies GM loved to flaunt. Awards that mean nothing. Those trophies in the ads? They do not tow a trailer home when your truck seizes. For years, GM blanketed television screens with commercials boasting about J.D. Power Awards for dependability. Families saw smiling actors proclaiming Chevrolet and GMC trucks as the most dependable, longest lasting. The problem is that these awards often measured minor glitches in electronics, the same way they measured catastrophic failures. A frozen infotainment screen counted just as heavily as a seized engine. The gap between advertising perception and lived experience has never been wider. While commercials showed trucks climbing mountains, real owners were filing complaints about breakdowns on ordinary highways. While billboards boasted about trophies, mechanics were scraping metal debris from oil pans. The awards were props in a theater of reliability, and the audience, us, was left stranded on the roadside. Every glossy statue became another insult when engines began locking up at 30,000 miles. Dependability is not a slogan. It is whether your truck starts in the morning, carries your family safely, and lasts for years. No trophy can cover up the betrayal of that basic expectation. And when those expectations collapse, the fallout does not stop at marketing. It spreads to dealers, regulators, and everyone caught in the storm. Dealers caught in the crossfire. We stormed the dealerships demanding answers, and the mechanics had nothing but stickers and thicker oil. The moment GM announced the recall, local showrooms turned into battlegrounds. Customers who had proudly driven off the lot just months earlier returned furious, demanding fixes for trucks they were told were the most dependable. Service bays filled overnight with Silverados and Sierras, many of them already showing warning signs of failure. Yet all the technicians could do was follow vague instructions. Drain the oil, pour in a heavier grade, and screw on a cap labeled 0W40. Sales staff were equally trapped. They could not move inventory covered by stop sale orders. Trucks sat in neat rows collecting dust while dealership revenue froze. Families waiting for promised deliveries were told their purchases were delayed indefinitely. Some buyers accused dealers of knowingly selling defective vehicles, but most of the employees were blindsided too. They faced the same corporate stonewalling as their customers, with only scripted talking points to recite. For many owners, the local dealership was not just where they bought their trucks, but where they took their children for free hot dogs during sales events and shook hands with salesmen who became friends. That deep bond turned sour, leaving customers feeling deceived and dealers feeling abandoned by Detroit. The dealerships were supposed to be places of trust, hometown institutions where generations bought trucks with confidence. Suddenly, they became the face of a crisis they did not create. And while dealers struggled, another front was opening in Washington. Regulators finally say what we already knew. It took 40 families speaking up to force Washington to act. Complaints piled into the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration for years, each one a desperate plea from owners who experienced catastrophic failure. By January of 2025, the agency had no choice but to launch a preliminary evaluation. What began as a small probe quickly snowballed into an engineering analysis covering nearly 900,000 vehicles. Investigators sifted through crash data, service bulletins, and consumer reports. The pattern was undeniable. Engines produced at a single plant during a 3-year span were failing in the same violent way, often before 30,000 miles. Regulators concluded that this was not misuse or bad luck. It was a systemic defect. For owners, the investigation was a bittersweet victory. It proved we were right all along, but it also showed how long it took for officials to respond. Families had already suffered breakdowns and injuries, while GM downplayed the risk. Washington confirmed what drivers already knew. GM's reputation for dependability was a mask hiding dangerous flaws. Drivers often joke that you need a government investigation to get a corporation to admit the obvious, but here, the humor vanished quickly. Every new update from Washington was not simply paperwork. It was proof that families had been right, and that our warnings mattered more than GM's denials. But if regulators brought vindication, the courtroom promised something even more powerful: accountability with a financial price tag. You've seen the recalls, the lawsuits, the betrayal. But this scandal is far from finished, and you can't afford to miss the next chapter. Subscribe now, because the next revelation could be parked in your own driveway. Lawyers smell blood. This is not just a recall anymore. It is billions in lawsuits. And for once, GM is on the defensive. The recall opened the floodgates for class actions accusing GM of negligence and deliberate concealment. Attorneys pointed to internal memos, where engineers warned about machining flaws years earlier. Instead of redesigning the parts, executives approved a cheaper workaround and hoped engines would survive until warranties expired. The legal claims grew quickly. Owners sought compensation for repairs, diminished resale values, lost business income, and even injuries caused by sudden engine failure. Each case carried the potential for millions in damages, and collectively, they threatened to climb into the billions. Investors noticed immediately. Analysts downgraded profit forecasts, warning that legal settlements could erase years of earnings. Shareholders who once cheered GM's cost-cutting now feared those savings would be swallowed by jury verdicts. Inside courtrooms, glossy commercials and golden trophies carried no weight. What mattered were documents, testimony, and patterns of deception. And those patterns told a consistent story. GM valued short-term savings over long-term safety. For attorneys, every angry owner represents more than a client. It represents leverage against a company that gambled with public trust. Courtrooms give families a place where glossy advertisements cannot drown out lived experience, where testimony replaces marketing, and where juries can punish a corporation in the only language it respects: money. If lawyers exposed management's decisions in court, workers inside the plants were already exposing something else: their shaken pride. Even their workers don't trust them. The people building the engines are ashamed to put their name on them. For decades, GM's assembly line workers wore their craftsmanship like a badge of honor. A Silverado rolling off the line was not just a product, it was proof of American skill and toughness. But as the scandal spread, that pride turned into unease. Union representatives described workers questioning why they were ordered to assemble components they knew had problems. Some admitted the ethical strain of building engines that might one day strand families or cause crashes. In hushed conversations, employees confessed they no longer told friends what they worked on, embarrassed that their labor was tied to a scandal rather than American reliability. The tension gave unions new leverage. They argued that protecting workers now meant demanding accountability from management. Safety was no longer just a consumer issue, it was a labor issue. If executives ignored defects, they endangered not only families on highways, but also the integrity of the workforce itself. Assembly line veterans who once cheered seeing their trucks on the highway now feel a pang of guilt. They know the strength of their own workmanship, yet they also know corporate managers overruled safety concerns. For many, the shame is personal. Their labor was tied to decisions they never supported. When even GM's own workers refuse to defend the product, the company's foundation begins to crumble. And that collapse does not stop at the factory floor. It spreads into every driveway, every resale lot, and every community tied to these trucks. Our trucks are losing value by the day. The trucks we counted on as assets are turning into financial traps. For years, families in places like Texas, Michigan, and Oklahoma treated their Silverados and Sierras as investments almost as safe as real estate. A reliable pickup could serve as both transportation and equity, holding value for trade-ins or small business financing. That confidence evaporated once the recall went public. Used car guides began listing affected models at steep discounts, with trade-in offers thousands of dollars lower than before. The sting is felt most by working-class households and entrepreneurs. A landscaper who counted on a dependable truck to secure contracts suddenly faces repair uncertainty and lower resale. A family who thought they could upgrade in a few years now finds themselves trapped with a depreciating liability. And insurance companies are adjusting too, raising premiums on models linked to sudden engine failure. Owners are paying more, yet their vehicles are worth less. Owners describe the feeling as watching their savings evaporate in real time. The truck parked in the driveway yesterday was a source of pride and stability, yet today it feels like a financial trap. That collapse of value leaves families not just frustrated, but genuinely frightened for their futures. It is not just money, it is pride. Communities that once compared towing strength now share horror stories of breakdowns. A symbol of reliability has transformed into a financial burden. And while our equity collapses, competitors are circling, ready to steal GM's most loyal customers. Ford and Toyota circle the wreckage. While GM scrambles, rivals are luring us away with reliability promises and incentives. Ford dealerships launched conquest campaigns, offering cash bonuses for drivers who trade in Silverados for F-Series trucks. Toyota expanded its certified pre-owned program, plastering ads with messages about durability and trust. Both companies place targeted promotions in pickup-heavy regions, hammering home one idea: you do not have to gamble on GM anymore. The timing could not be worse for GM. As their V8 engine seize on highways, Ford is pushing its F-150 Lightning electric truck, and Toyota is teasing hybrid pickups that combine fuel savings with traditional toughness. The message is clear. While GM hides behind thicker oil and new caps, competitors are moving confidently toward the future. Every conquest ad slices away at GM's customer base. Pickup loyalty is notoriously sticky. Once a family switches brands, they rarely return. That means every lost buyer today could represent decades of lost sales tomorrow. Rivals know it, and they are striking with precision. The sting cuts even deeper when lifelong GM households see their neighbors towing proudly with new Fords or Toyotas. Every trade-in incentive feels like salt in the wound, a reminder that loyalty is being rewarded elsewhere. For many, it is not just switching brands, it is switching identities. But this is not just about the marketplace. The scandal has caught the attention of another group always eager to pounce on corporate missteps: politicians in Washington. Congress smells blood. Now it is not just a recall, it is a headline for politicians to grill executives under the lights. Congressional committees have already floated hearings demanding that GM explain how a defect flagged years earlier was allowed to endanger families. Lawmakers from auto-heavy states are calling for truth in advertising reforms, citing the gap between most dependable slogans and seized engines. The optics are too powerful for politicians to ignore. Ordinary families betrayed, regulators slow to react, and a corporate giant squirming under scrutiny. Insurance companies add fuel to the fire. With risk tables revised, premiums on certain V8 trucks are climbing. That becomes another talking point. Households are not just facing dangerous breakdowns, but also higher costs every month. Politicians frame it as working families paying for corporate mistakes. Even if fines are modest, the reputational damage from televised hearings could be catastrophic. Executives dodging questions under oath become viral clips, reinforcing every driver's suspicion that the company cares more about margins than lives. In Washington, appearances matter as much as outcomes. And once politicians turn a scandal into a symbol, it takes years to recover. For lawmakers, nothing delivers headlines like a corporate scandal that hits ordinary families. Each soundbite, each tough question under the bright lights is political gold. The scandal becomes more than defective trucks. It becomes a national drama where politicians claim the mantle of protector while executives scramble for cover. Yet amid the chaos, ordinary drivers are not powerless. We can take steps to protect ourselves right now. Taking back control. They broke our trust, but here is how we protect ourselves, our families, and our wallets. The first step is checking your vehicle identification number on the federal database to confirm if your truck is part of the recall. Keep meticulous maintenance records, because documentation can mean the difference between a denied claim and full compensation. At the first sign of unusual noises, oil consumption, or warning lights, demand inspection immediately. Drivers are also forming advocacy groups, pooling experiences online, and pressing GM to extend warranties or even offer buybacks. The more stories shared, the harder it becomes for executives to minimize the scope of the problem. Community pressure has already forced Washington to act once. It can force stronger remedies again. Most importantly, owners are reclaiming their voice. These trucks were sold as symbols of strength, family, and tradition. That trust was shattered, but the people who bought them still hold the power to decide where their money goes next. Every VN check, every complaint filed, every lawsuit joined is a step toward accountability. Truck owners are also realizing the power of unity. Online groups, community meetings, And even neighborhood conversations are creating a louder chorus than any one driver could manage alone. What once felt like isolated frustration is turning into a movement, a collective demand for fairness, accountability, and lasting change. GM may have gambled on silence, but drivers are speaking louder than ever. And that collective voice will shape what happens in every showroom, boardroom, and courtroom still to come. They sold us on strength, on legacy, on trucks built to outlast generations. But instead, they gambled with our safety, our families, and our wallets. What you've just seen is only the beginning of a fight that's bigger than one recall. It's about truth versus spin, power versus accountability. And the next chapter, it's coming faster than they want you to know. Subscribe now, because missing what happens next could cost you more than any broken engine ever will.